Today's daf is daf Nun Zayin, and we'll begin here on the bottom of Nun Vav Amid Beis, 4 lines up from the bottom, Omer of Ami. So Rabbi Ami is talking about the question of how do you violate the lav of lo seofe, of making the mincha into a leavened mincha. Hiniach siar al gabi isa. He didn't bake it or do anything directly to the dough, but he just put on CR, which is a leavening agent, which is called yeast, on top of the dough. So he just left it on the dough, the halach v'yashivlo, and then he checks out. So automatically, on its own, the dough becomes chametz. So he didn't actually actively create chametz. Nevertheless, says Rabbi Ami, Chayav oleh k'maisa Shabbos. Rabbi Ami has an analogy to Shabbos. In Shabbos, we have a malacha called bishul, and you just put something on the fire, and the bishul process happens on its own. Umaisa Shabbos ki haygavna mimachai, but the Gemara says, you know what? If I would find a precise analogy to your case of Hineach Sior al Gabi Isa in Shabbos, would you actually be chayav for that? Va'omer Rabbi Bar Bachana. Here we start today's daf. Omer Rabbi Yochanan, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hineach Basar al Gabi Gecholim. If you put meat on top of coals, it's not automatic that you will be chayav for tzliya, which is a told of bishul, but it all depends. Hipech bo, if he turned the meat on its other side, so in other words, he didn't just leave the meat on top of the coals, but he turned it over so that on both sides the meat would be cooked, then he's chai. But lo hipech bo, if he left it only on one side, then he's potter. And the reason he's potter is because he really didn't do a complete tzli, a complete grilling, because only part of the meat was grilled. Now, we're going to assume that the part of the meat that was grilled, if he didn't do hipuch, if he didn't turn it over, was less than a grogeris's worth. The shear for meleches bishul is grogeris. If the one half, let's say we'll call it the bottom half, was cooked to the point of what's called Kemichael Ben Soy, which is 1/3 of its cooking, and he cooked a full grogeris's worth on that half, then he has already bishul of a grogeris in that half. He doesn't need hipuch. But we're talking about a case where that side that he put directly on the coals did not reach full bishul. It's only Kemichael Ben Soy. But in addition, it didn't. There's no particular location or point in the meat where the full grogeris's worth of meat was roasted to the point of Kemichael Ben soy. So in a sense, what Rabbi Yochanan is arguing in the case of Lo Hipech Ba is that Mimonevshach, he's exempt for both of two reasons. Number one, because there wasn't a full bishul, a full tzli, of a shear of kugogeres. And number two, what would you tell me? You're going to tell me that the other side of the meat reached Kemichael Ben soy, and therefore we could be mitzaref the two sides of the meat. That I can't do because he never turned over the meat. So what he's left with is less than a grogeris worth of tzli, and therefore he's potter. And the Gemara wants to suggest that if you put CR and you just lay it down on top of the dough, that's not a complete process of afia, of chimutz. You're chayav to be mechamitz and isa, but you weren't really mechamitz the isa. To be mechamitz the isa, you have to make sure that the fermenting agent will reach the entirety of the dough on both sides of the dough. My Rava now wants to go back and defend Rav Yami and say, "My chayav nabi dekomer k'maisit tzli shel Shabbos." The case that Rabbi Ami said that you'd be chayav for is a case where you turned it onto its other side. That's when we can accept the equation. And then we're going to say that even though, let's say, you didn't actively do a Maisa Bishul, but nevertheless, what you were able to do was to create an effect in which both sides of the meat were roasted. That's enough. And in that case, you'd be chayav if we have a parallel scenario in Sior al Gabi Isa for the lav of Machametz, which generates Malchus. So in the case of leavening a mincha by putting Sior yeast on top of the dough, it would only be if he placed yeast on both sides of the dough, and then you get a complete chimus, a complete process of leavening. Gufa. What's exactly the case? The Gemara is going to apply the logic of Mimonavshach. Elam, if you're going to tell me the ilo hipech be lo bishel, if you're talking about a situation where it didn't even reach Kemichael ben Josai because he didn't turn it over, then pshita, we know without Rabbi Yochanan's statement that you're not chai for bishul unless you cook it 1/3 of its bishul, which is called Kemichael ben Josai. Ella, but we therefore have no choice, but we have to assume that the scenario is that the ilo mahapich le nami havi bishul, which means that if he leaves the meat on one side on top of the coals without turning it over, then eventually what's going to happen is that because of the heat of the coals, it's going to get roasted to a point where there'll be Kemichael ben Josai. And even though it'll only be on one side of the meat, but if it reaches a kigrogros worth, then he should be chayiv. Amai lo mechayiv. Lo tzricha, what's the case of Rabbi Yochanan? De'i lo hipechba, had he not turned it over, havi boshel mitzarecha k'maychel ben Josai. Even though it would reach k'maychel ben Josai shlish bishulo on one side, and if he would have gone ahead and turned the meat over to the other side, then boshel mishnei tzaddim k'maychel ben Josai, that would have been perfect because then we have a complete grogeres on both sides of the meat, and we could be mitzaref the two, and both the meat on this side as well as the meat on the other side reach K'maychel ben Josai. However, he didn't do so. He didn't turn it to the other side. And Kamash Malan, Rabbi Yochanan wants to teach me that Kol demitzarecha K'maychel ben Josai lo lav klumu. Now, what's the problem here? He didn't turn it upside down, but it did reach the point of K'maychel ben Josai. So why exactly is he potter? After all, the Gemara just said that De'i lo mahapichle nami amai bishul nami havi bishul, it would have reached K'maychel ben Josai amai lo machayv. Why isn't he chayiv? So let's ask that question now, according to the Gemara's answer. And here we could go in a number of different directions. You have Rashi, Tosfos, and others. Each one has his own way of interpreting this Gemara. I'll suggest one way of interpreting the Gemara. Gemara means that although it will reach K'maychel ben Josai, but he's not chayiv. Why? Because you have to see different parts of the meat. Like this part of the meat got cooked, but that's less than a grogeris is worth. This part of the meat, and now you want to integrate all these different parts of the meat, and Rabbi Yochanan is saying you can't do that unless you mahapich ba, and on both sides of the meat it reached K'maychel ben Josai. The other way of going is to say that although it did reach K'maychel ben Josai, he's not chai because there wasn't a grogeris's worth. But that's a very difficult pshat because then once again we would ask the question of Rabbi Yochanan, is pshita my komashmal? Why does he have to tell me that? Omar Rava, V'im nitzla boki grogeres mitzad echad b'mokom echad chayav. If when does Rabbi Yochanan say that you're not chayav? That's because the grogeres' worth would have to be an integration of different parts of the meat. But if even if without hibuch on one side of the meat, there is a grogeres worth of meat that reached kemaich medrasai in one particular spot, and you already have a grogeres, then you'd be chayav. Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi. The premise here of Rava, and it seems before him of Rabbi Yochanan, is that you cannot be mitzaref these different places and parts of the meat together and integrate them into one whole to create a grogeres. It's got to be a grogeres in one spot. That's not so. Vatanya, Vatnan, we have a Mishnah in Shabbos. He tells you it's the very end of Shabbos on Kuf Beis. It says, "Akodea kolshu chaya." Okay, now when you build something, you need kedicha, right? Kedicha means you have to drill a hole. And the carpenter is the expert at knowing how to drill the hole. And what happens if he drills a very, very small hole? That small hole, which is called a kolshu, is not large enough to function. And therefore, the Gemara asks the following question: Hechidami, what's the case? If he just drilled one particular hole, then what function does it have? How can he be chayiv for that? I mean, the Torah says that you chayiv for Shabbos from Meleches Machsheves when you've created something that's functional. Here it's not functional. There's no point. L'may chazili, what's it good for? But rather we have to assume that he did kedicha not in one place, but in a whole slew of places. And then it's chazil it's tarif. Then even though it was only a kol shehu, but the carpenters know how to connect these different holes together and widen them to make it one large hole. And that's why he's chayav. So that even though if you would isolate any particular hole that he drilled, it would not be functional. But since if you would integrate all these different holes together, it would be functional. And therefore, if we go with the analogy to the case of a grogeres worth of tzli, where he roasted the meat, then shouldn't it be enough if there's a little bit here that was roasted, a little bit here, and then we could be mitzaref it like the case of drilling. And the commentaries go to town over here, like what kind of analogy is the Gemara making? In the case of drilling, you have the expert carpenter who knows how to drill small holes and then put them all together by bridging them and widening them. But in the case of Bishul, who in their right mind would start roasting this part of the meat and then that part of the meat and this part of the meat? That's not the way you do roasting. That's not Maleches Machshavas. So the Gemara says, "Lo li'olam b'makom echad." You jumped the gun when you said that because he drilled in 3 different places, we could integrate those 3 holes together to make him chayiv. No, it's only a kolshu, and he only drilled in one place, one hole, in a very small hole. You'll ask me, so why is that called Meleches Machshavas? What function does it serve? And the answer is the kachazul above the aklila. Right, when you have a key in the old times, I don't know about today's keys, but each key had many teeth. And if you put the teeth into a hole, it allows you to open the door. And therefore, this small kedicha of a kolshu is functional for a key. Ika diamri, we have another version of the transmission of this discussion back and forth. According to Rava's statement now in the second Lishna, it comes out that even if you reached K'maychel ben Josoi by integrating many different parts of the meat, each part in and of itself less than K'maychel ben Josoi less than a grogeres reached K'maychel ben Josoi, we can integrate them all to Amalei Ravina Rav Ashi. I'm going to bring you a raya from Shabbos. Hakodeh kolshu. What's the case? Is kolshu l'may chazi? Right now, the Gemara assumes that one little hole is not worthy for anything. It's not fit for anything. And for sure, how could he be chayiv as a kodeach? Ela la b'shnayim shloshim makomos. And we're going to say chazilitz tarufe, that we can join together and integrate all these different two or three, holes and bridge them together, make one wide hole. So therefore, we're going to apply the same principle, says Ravina to Rav Ashi in supporting Rava, that if you cooked the meat or roasted the meat here, there, and there, and there, and each place less than a kibach ben we can integrate them all together, and he's chayav. Lo, Gemara rejects the olam makom echad. The chazil abavalak do. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brayso, and now we're talking again about the Iser lav of leavening, which is called chimutz, the mincha. Ilu nemar, if we would have said Asher takriv Hashem lo te'asa chametz. Now we have a discussion about what's called shirayim. As we've discussed on many occasions, the kometz after the kvitza is burnt on the mizbeach. What's left, which is called the shiarya mincha, is eaten by the kohen, and that's not burnt on the mizbeach. And the pasuk says, "Asher takriv Hashem lo te'asa chametz." Hayisi Omer, I would interpret this pasuk to mean ainli ella below te'asa chametz ella kometz bilvad. How do we know that even before he did the kmitza, at that point, if he were to leaven, if he would cause a chimutz on the entire mincha, he hasn't yet split the mincha into a kometz as opposed to shirayim. How do we know he violates the lav? Talmud Lomer mincha. Apparently, the word mincha here in this pasuk is superfluous. He says here that we know the prohibition applies to a mincha. Why did the Torah add the word mincha? The whole context is mincha. And the extra word mincha is telling me the entire mincha, even before kmitza. Now the Brisa says, Shar Menachos minayin. Maybe, since we find the Iser of Lo Teofe Chametz only in the parsha of Minchas Marcheshes, so maybe only Minchas Marcheshes is subject to the lav of leavening of chimutz. How do we know that all minchas are such? Talmud Lomer kol ha-mincha, and the extra word kol teaches me that all menachos are subject to the lav of chimutz. Asher takriv Hashem. Let's go back to the pasuk. Ksheira v'lo psula. What happens if the mincha became possible before you mechametz it? So from the words Asher takriv Hashem, the Torah says, don't make chametz out of something that can be brought on the mizbeach. But hamachametz, it's like Sher Chayv, hamachametz psula, potter. If you were mechametz a mincha psula, then you're potter. And I would add a comment here that that's a little bit paradoxical, because the very moment that it's chametz, it's already possible. And yet you're telling me that he's chayav for being mechametz the Isa. Well, you just finished telling me that if the Isa is psula lemincha, then there's no lav of chimutz. But chimutz by definition makes it possible. Anyway, boy Rav Papa. Chimtza v'yotzas v'chaza v'chimtza. So now we get into a sugya which is called the psul of yotze, which means that you took a korban outside of the chomos, of the mechitzos of the azara, and it becomes possibly din yotze. So now, he was mechametz before the mincha went out of the azara, and then we just finished learning from the pasuk Asher Takriv Hashem that he's chayav malchus and violates the lav. But now, he took the mincha out of the confines of the mechitzos of the azara. Then he brings it back in. And after he brings it back in, he does another act of chimutz. Now, this is interesting because in general, elsewhere, let's say, for example, in Bishul, we say Ein Bishul Achar Bishul. But that's not true for this lav of chimutz. And therefore, the halacha is that if chimtza v'chaza v'chimtza, if it starts leavening and then you complete the process, you chayv a second time around. But Since he took the mincha out of the Azara, that itself engendered a psul of Yotze, and now when he brings it back in and he does another act of chimutz, he's not going to be chayav because it's not Asher Takrivu Hashem. And now Rav Papa analyzes the two tzadim of his suffix, which is going to end up with teku. Keva the yotza, shall we say, since, as we said before intuitively, he took it out of the Azor, therefore, if Saleh Lebi Yotze, it's possibly the Yotze. When do we say he could be Chayiv Mishum Mechametz? That's only if it's kosher, if it's royal Likiyum Mincha. But if it's Psula, then this, he took it out of the Azor. How could be Chayiv for Mechametz Achar Mechametz? Hodilma Kevet Dechimtza. Once he went ahead and he caused the leavening of the dough, is psul yotze lo mahanile. Now, exactly what those words mean is a gigantic controversy. One way of explaining psul yotze lo mahanibe is that something that's already possible, you can't add another psul of yotze. Others say that what the Gemara has in mind, psul yotze lo mahanile, it means that the Torah already established that after the chimutz, it's already possible. And yet you're chayiv for being mechametzit. And therefore, ki mahader mechametzle, when he does a second act of chimutz, mechayiv alei mishum mechametz achar mechametz. I mean, the whole point of mechametz achar mechametz being chayiv is that you did the second act of chimutz on a mincha psula because it was already possible by virtue of the first chimutz. And yet the Torah says that you chayiv malchus not only for the first chimutz, but even for the second chimutz. So therefore, says Rav Papa, I'm inclined to believe that even if you did the second chimutz after the psul of Yotze, what difference does it make? It was already possible because by virtue of the first chimutz. So what are you adding here, in effect? You're not adding much. True, there would be a psul yotze according to this interpretation, but the psul yotze does not prevent the violation of the law of chimutz because we're holding yesh chimutz achar chimutz. Take boy Rav Mari has another question. Chimtza barosha shel mizbeach mahu. Okay. Now, a mincha has to be brought up the kevesh, and then it's put on the top part of the mizbeach until finally it's put on the fire of the mizbeach, and that's called haktoras hamincha. Now, he took the mincha up to the top of the mizbeach, and the Torah says, "Asher takrivu amar Achmona v'akarva." In other words, the Gemara believes now in the first side of Rabbi Muri's question that maybe once he takes it up to the top of the Mizbeach, it's already considered as if he was makriv it. Because what's missing now? Just, that last, shall we say, makriv patish to put it onto the fire. Oh, dilma mechusrak Torah, ki mechusar ma'isa. You say no, even though he brought it up to the top of the mizbeach, but he still needs another ma'isa of putting it on the fire, which is called haktorah. So in the first side, what we're saying is that bringing it up to the top of the mizbeach is like it was already offered on the mizbeach, and therefore there's no lav because the lav here only applies to Asher Takrivu, which means you're in the process pre-hakrova. Here you're not pre-hakrova, you're post-hakrova. Do you say no? Hakrova means when you put it on the H. The fact that you brought it up to the top of the mizbeach, it's adayin mechusar haktor. Take Pashtan and afgalei mikol hamincha. Now that we learned that even before the kmitza, the lav of leavening, of causing the leavening of the mincha applies to the entire mincha. Before you actually did the kmitza, is asher takrivu lomali. Why do I need this pasuk? Asher takrivu. We're talking way beyond, way before hakrava. We're talking even before kmitza. If it's before kmitza, and yet you're chayav, because that we derive from the pasuk called mincha, is that for sure you'd be chayav. Asher takrivu Hashem. What are you adding here? Asher takrivu Hashem. The boile chesanya asher takrivu l'rabos minchas nesachim lechimutz. Okay, minchas nesachim is kulo kolil. Let's see if I'm right about that. Just one second. Right? Minchas nesachim will accompany a carbon ola or a carbon shlamim. And it's kulo kolil. Completely burnt on the mizbeach. There's no kmitza and there's no shiuria ha-mincha. And now he took this minchas nesachim and he was mechametz it. And the question is, does he violate the lav of mechametz? So Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili says that in fact he's chayav because asher takrivu is a generic term that encompasses even a minchas nesachim within the context of the lav of chimutz. The Gemara is going to analyze Rabbi Yossi Haglili in just one moment. However, first the Gemara quotes Rabbi Akiva, the dissenting view, and Rabbi Akiva is going to take the words Asher Takrivu and use them for a different ribuy l'rabos lechem aponim lechimutz. So now we have a double machlokas between Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva. Machlokas number one is whether or not yichai for chimutz in a minchas nesachim, which is kulo kolil, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili has a special pasuk to expand the chiyuv of chimutz to include and encompass even the case of minchas nesachim. And Rabbi Akiva doesn't have that limud. He doesn't have that. So according to Rabbi Akiva, apparently in the minchas nesachim, which is kulei kolil, there's no lav of chimutz. Now we have another machlokas. Would there be a lav of chimutz with regard to the lechem aponim? Now, this is a little bit of a confusing Gemara to me. I think it means the other. Just one second. I just don't. I'm not sure what the mitzias here is. What's exactly the case of lechem aponim lechimutz? Okay, maybe we'll see the next sugya. We'll understand it better. And Rabbi Yossi Aglili would hold that you're not chayav for chimutz at a lechem aponim, because lechem aponim has no kmitza and it's not like any other mincha. So the Gemara says, let's go back to Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Asher takrivu, he says, l'rabos minchas nechasachim, minchas chachim may peirosem. There's no possibility of chimutz because in the case of minchas nesachim, as opposed to, let's say, other menachos like a minchas chote or minchas knos, here we add a very significant volume of oil, and we have a principle that made peiros ein machmitzah. So how can you possibly say, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that yechai for being mechametz minchas nesachim when minchas nesachim is with oil, and if it's with oil, then there won't be any chimutz. There just won't be any chimutz. How can you be chai for chimutz?